There were all kinds of things of which I was afraid of at first, from grizzly bears to mean horses and gunfighters, but by acting as if I was not afraid, I gradually ceased to be afraid. He loses his mother and his wife the same day, within 12 hours of each other. Theodore is an astute journaler. He writes every single day, and he writes that night in his journal, a big X covers the page, and at the bottom, the words, "The light has gone out of my life." I rose like a rocket. He rises like a rocket. 2 months after he writes this, he writes in his journal after he loses an election, he says, "I am absolutely deserted. My isolated peak has become a valley. Every bit of influence I had was gone. The things I want to do, I am powerless to accomplish." He goes out west to Dakota and he starts a ranching business. Some days he would walk 40 miles without eating. Out west, he says, "I feel as if it would make no difference what becomes of me. I have nothing to live for." He's riding his horse 16 hours a day. He'll gallop at top speed over dangerous terrain. People think he's trying to kill himself. And he's just going. He says this one night in his journal. He says, "Care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough." Like any good coming-of-age story, what we see with Theodore Roosevelt is we see him becoming something very different out west than he was when he was back home in the east. We see him becoming someone worthy of study. He goes out there and he's frail and he comes back a new human being. He finds his limits. Back home, his old crew thinks he's lost his mind. We only knew that the man who seemed to have the brightest opportunity and the most splendid career had disappeared. Apparently he had disappeared in absolute failure. He was out of politics altogether. He was no longer apparently available for anything. He had gone away, and it seemed like a candlelight that had been snuffed out, mistaken for some luminary which was ever to be the guide. But you gotta know that Roosevelt, obviously, clearly, through the lens of history, he wasn't a snuffed out candle, nor was he done with politics. He just needed a break. He needed to test himself. He needed the strenuous challenge where he could confront his fears. The story of Theodore Roosevelt is the story of a small boy who read books about great men and decided he wanted to be like them. Your limits can only be revealed in the rugged terrain of defeat. Don't look for your greatness while settling for an easy life. You gotta push through to the wilderness. Roosevelt was abnormal in the way that he attacked problems and he would attack situations. He had a dangerous and stressful upbringing. And all of these things eventually prepared him to be one of the best leaders that America has ever seen. By the time he became president, he was 42 years old. Get this, the youngest president in history. At 42 years old, he had been through more trauma than most people in their entire lives. But it prepared him. Sometimes the solution to fear is experiencing what you're afraid of and realizing it was not worthy of your attention. There were all kinds of things of which I was afraid of at first, from grizzly bears to mean horses and gunfighters, but by acting as if I was not afraid, I gradually ceased to be afraid. By acting as if I was not afraid, I gradually ceased to be afraid.